Minister, by now it should be absolutely clear to all but the most willfully blind that there is no longer a mere disconnect between government and our people on the issues of immigration, migration and asylum. There is in fact a chasm between public and private opinion and the policy of government. Opinion poll after poll confirms this. Indeed, I tried to warn the government of this in June 2022 during leaders' questions with Minister Darragh O'Brien. And at that time, I urged government of our need as a society to find some way of exploring, in an adult, pragmatic and constructive way, the profound challenges that we are being confronted with in terms of unsustainable levels of inward immigration and asylum into this state, and in particular the impact that this was having on housing and the availability of emergency accommodation. The situation since then has become immeasurably worse. Record inward migration is taking place in the same context as record-breaking homelessness. The cold, hard reality of these statistics reveal that the breaking point has not just been reached, it has been shattered. However, instead of rising to the challenge last June and acknowledging that these were issues of emerging and growing concern, I was met with finger-wagging arrogance from a minister who misinterpreted what I said and who then went on to accuse me of somehow representing a threat to social cohesion. That pattern of talking down to communities, of blatantly misrepresenting public representatives who dared to broach the issue, has continued to this very day, and it's unacceptable. The message went out loud and clear last June. Dare to open your mouth on this issue, even here in a chamber supposedly at the heart of the democratic and open debate, and you will be framed as some type of crypto far-right racist. It is terrifying to contemplate that this government has yet to learn the lesson that parents of small children learn very early on, and that is prohibiting questions does nothing to prevent them from being asked. And I certainly, as a public representative here, will continue to ask the questions on behalf of my constituents in Laois and Offaly. So here we are again today, attempting perhaps in vain to try and force a debate on this increasingly socially contentious issue. We know this issue is sensitive indeed, and I will not stand here and let the view go out that compassion is only to be found among TDs in every other seat, bar these ones here. There is no monopoly on compassion when it comes to these issues. We know we are talking about real people in difficult and very often horrendous situations. But we also know that we cannot go on silencing the opposition or drowning out critical and constructive voices, or worse, accusing people of hate speech merely because some people disagree with their point of view or with their remarks, and that's not fair, and it's open to interpretation. Not everyone speaks or communicates in gilded and politically refined terms. Sometimes communities and people speak in the raw voice of anger and frustration. And to listen to people, however, you would believe that anyone who wants a voice and an opinion on these issues must first get clearance from the PR units of the government parties or the advocacy NGOs. And that's not right in a democratic republic. We should be able to have constructive debate here and have the views of all of our constituents across this state heard loud and clear. The NGOs do not represent all of our constituents. They do not. They were not elected to represent them. We were elected here, each and every one of us. Things cannot continue in the same vein, Minister. This certainly also applies to our disastrous deportation policy, which is honoured more in the breach than in the observance. I have always sought to ground my statements in fact, and that is why I have asked the Oireachtas Library and Research Service to compile an analysis of the deportation procedures in place in other EU member states, and I am awaiting that document. But one thing we know for certain is that Ireland's policy of voluntary return is being absurdly abused, and that's a fact. In fact, I know from parliamentary replies to questions that I have submitted that the overall percentage of deportation orders that were affirmed or actually carried out between 2018 and May 2023 of this year was just over 11%. This means, in real terms, that just 282, 11.5%, of the 2,442 deportation orders issued were actually carried out. That's of serious concern. As commentators such as Dr. Matt Tracy have pointed out, this means that if you were presented with a deportation order by the Irish state, you have almost a 90% chance of having that order overturned and being allowed to stay here forever. I also know from replies that I've received that the total cost of accommodating international protection or asylum applicants will increase by at least 500 million this year. In fact, the total cost for people in the IPAS accommodation from the start of 2016 and 2022 is now in excess of €1 billion. No state with a responsible policy towards expenditure can ignore such costs. They must form part of a debate around sustainability and the impact of such costs on other areas of public expenditure. That is being responsible and not reckless. This government has effectively engaged in years of magical thinking on these issues. It has sought to promote a fanciful view against all common sense, and there is no such thing as infinite capacity when it comes to meeting what are undoubtedly very real humanitarian obligations. It is extraordinary to think that we have arrived at a point where we have to spell it out, that obligations go both ways. There's no one-way traffic. And yes, there is an obligation to assist where we can. But there is also a higher obligation on the Irish Government and the Irish State to unashamedly and without reservation to prioritise the welfare of its own citizens. Yes, we have put out the welcome mat to those fleeing here, but increasingly this has resulted in this nation becoming a doormat for others to trample on, with no regard for our laws or our security. Just look at the thousands who arrived having destroyed their documentation. We can survive being a welcoming nation, but we cannot survive being taken for fools and having our generosity abused for another decade or more. And I certainly, as a public representative, will continue to ask the questions. I will not be silenced, and no finger wagging will deter me from challenging this government on what is a reckless approach to immigration. Gurr magat.